Thoughtful Woman. Written and read by K.T. Finlay. All rights reserved. Chapter 1. The Limits of Forgiveness. A fireball bursting through the driver's window was pretty much what she'd expected from half a pint of petrol. That the blast might also be enough to blow open the unlatched door and engulf her in flames at the rear of the car hadn't occurred to her at all. Fortunately for Sally, the flash fire was both brief and slightly off target, leaving her shocked but unscathed. It gave the pursuing policeman a chance to further close the gap, but he was still 200 yards away when she reached the top of the platform. She retrieved the key from the fine chain around her neck, undid the padlock to the Flying Fox, and slipped it back down her top. The whole platform shook as the officer threw himself up the stairs, but she was already hanging from the pulley, drifting out towards the edge of the platform. She wasn't quite clear of it when she heard him reach the top and leap towards her. "Got you!" he cried, and she cringed, expecting his hand on her coat at any second, but unbelievably she drifted free, his fingers missing her by inches. "Blast!" he swore. "You can't get away. We'll have you sealed off," he shouted after her, now rapidly accelerating back. Then he noticed a trail of smoke coming from the bottom right-hand corner of her coat as it flapped in the wind. Something from the Mini must have blown onto it when she'd set it alight. As he watched, a lick of flame appeared amidst the smoke, growing larger as she picked up speed. Sally felt the heat of the flame intensify, but needing both hands to cling to the handset, she faced a stark choice: burn or let go and fall the 50 feet to the riverbed below. It had been 2 years since she'd first met Emma and convinced her to join her quest for revenge. Was it really going to end like this? "So what happened?" asked Freddie, taking a sip of his coffee. "She fell. Smashed a bit on the rocks. February 8th, 1984. It's hard to believe it's been 3 years now," replied James. Freddie shook his head sadly. "Well, I hope it was quick." James added another spoonful of sugar to his tea and thanked the waitress for his freshly made scone. "It was. She died instantly, apparently." He looked pensive for a moment, envisaging the past. "What I never figured out is why he did it. I mean, I thought they were happy together. She was a nice woman, and a real looker." "You're certain he killed her? He got off the charge?" asked Freddie. James nodded slowly. "Oh yes, he told me so himself, after the trial was over. He just never said why." "And you're certain that he really did arrange a hit on the witness?" Freddie continued. "Graham Mellors. Yeah, he did that too. He arranged it through his lawyer, the one we're seeing tonight. The poor bugger was just walking on the beach, minding his own business. Probably didn't see a thing. I think Terry was just being paranoid." Freddie raised his cup to hide the contempt on his face. "Sounds like Terry." James glared at him. "It kept the man alive. It's also why he wrote down everything he knew about the agents he was working with. For insurance, he said. He was always one for the insurance, our Terry. Maybe he just killed Carol for the payout. Did you ever think of that?" James glared at him. "Terry and Carol Walker were my friends. You didn't really know him. He'd never have done anything like that." The rest of the cafe's clientele were staring at them now, and Freddie raised his hand slightly off the table to calm his colleague. "Remember where we are, James. We're supposed to be ramblers, exploring the area, not a pair of conspiracy theorists writing a book. Calm down, for goodness sake." James scowled at him, but Freddie persisted. "We need to find out what happened to him, but not because he was your friend. We need to get that document back, or more than a dozen agents could be toast, including us. The fact that he's your friend can help us or hinder us. Your choice." He took another sip of coffee before tackling his chocolate cake. James begrudgingly gave him a nod. "Right. Okay. Where do you want to start?" Freddie pointed out the window. "At Coverton, where Carol fell off the cliff. It's a good walk up the coast to the west. I reckon we can get there and back before it gets dark. Mrs. Hinchcliffe at the B&B thought it was doable by a couple of fit young lads like us." James gave a sardonic laugh. "You want to watch that one, mate. I reckon she's got her eye on you. Young? Ha! You're in your 40s. They finished their late lunch and left the Cutty Sark Cafe. James was first out, and Freddie caught him staring at a car turning into a side road to head up the hill. "What's up?" he asked. James removed his tongue from his cheek. "It's a funny old world. That was Graham Mellors' widow." It was one of those moments when everything in Emma's garden conspired to create perfection. A luxurious spring sun gently warmed her back, the early flowers perfumed the air, and to accompany the birdsong, the birch leaves shimmered and chattered gently in the sparkling clean sea breeze. The whole world breathed with life and a quiet determination to get on with things, which was for the most part almost completely wasted on her. What really mattered was the furnace of rage roaring inside, consuming mind, body and soul. Her fists opened and clenched, the only visible sign of the tension that rippled up her arms and into her shoulders before spearing down through her heart and guts. Huge sobs burst from her throat with such force that she struggled to breathe. A vision of her George, smiling and waving goodbye, not knowing it was to be the last time, was replaced by the sight of his killer punching the air in victory as the not guilty verdict was read out in court that very morning. She could see the delighted lawyer grinning broadly as he shook the victor's hand. Another game won. "You bastards!" she shrieked at the top of her voice. Her eyes clenched tight, face turned to the heavens, mouth open so far it hurt. "You bastards!" she gasped more quietly as the sobs returned and robbed her even of the ability to scream her despair. The tears burst afresh, and in frustration she collapsed to her knees, her arms clutching herself in a desperate hug, as if George was still there, holding her tight. "You bloody bastards!" she whispered to herself, as the spasms in her chest refused to let her refill her lungs. For a full minute she just rocked gently back and forth on her knees, still hugging herself as hard as she could, silently letting the tears course down her cheeks and onto the grass. Slowly, she became aware of a presence. A woman's shoes walked quietly past on her left side towards the patio table. She heard the clunks and clinks as bottles and glasses were put down, and the gentle scrape of a chair being pulled out to allow the woman to sit. At last she managed to regain enough control to partly uncurl, look up at her visitor and say, "Who the bloody hell are you?" "My name's Sally Mellors," said the slim 30-something brunette. "I thought you might need a stiff drink." Emma's face added a layer of bewilderment to the cavalcade of emotions already in play. "Who? What?" she spluttered. Sally reached down into her willow basket and pulled out a lemon, a wooden chopping board and a small knife. "I was in court this morning, specifically to watch your case. Have you tried this new Bombay Sapphire gin? It's exquisite." Emma twitched her head in frustration. "Why were you watching George's case?" Sally carefully shaved off some zest from the lemons and added it to the pair of glasses in front of her. "It's a very personal case of déjà vu. A single to start?" she asked, breaking the seal on the beautiful blue glass bottle. "The father of the drunk who killed your husband killed mine in a road accident 3 years ago. He was drunk as well." "I'm so sorry," whispered Emma. Sally nodded her head as she measured out the gin. "That's why I'm here. I'm sorry too." There was a loud hiss as Sally unscrewed the lid off the tonic water. "And I knew what you'd be going through. Here you are," she said, carrying both glasses across the lawn. Emma took one, and attempting a desperate smile through the tears, clinked it gently against Sally's. "Absent friend," she said, and drained it in one. Sally gently patted her shoulder, took the empty glass and went back to the table to make her another one. She reached down into the basket again. "I brought pâté, cheese and crackers if you'd like something to eat with it," she asked. Emma nodded again, and heaving a heavy sigh, dragged herself back to her feet. "That would be nice," she said, as she slumped down into the other garden chair. "I haven't eaten anything since breakfast." Sally smiled and offered her a cracker with brie. "Thought not. Where are your sons? I'm a bit surprised they've left you on your own this afternoon." Emma nibbled at a cracker. "They're just out for a while, getting us something to drink. It's okay. I actually wanted a little time away from them, so I didn't have to keep putting a brave face on it, I know. Well, you don't need to do that with me. Just let rip whenever you feel like it," said Sally, handing over another couple of crackers. "I live over there on the outskirts of Throcking," she said, pointing east across the Sky River Valley. "You can see it from here, that renovated farmhouse above the main road. I'm an artist now. I took it up seriously after Graham was killed. It helped me to process things." Emma stared at her. "How long before the pain stops?" she pleaded. Sally kept looking across the valley. "No idea. Mine's still there. And the rage. Everyone's different. I guess it depends how much you're prepared to let things go." "Isn't it better to forgive and forget, if only for your own sake?" asked Emma. Sally shrugged. "Again, it depends. If you're just going to fume but not actually do anything, then yeah, that's dumb. Better to let it go. But if you're really prepared to seek revenge..." Emma's face hardened, and she became more focused. "If I ran Bob Harland over, then I'd go to jail myself. What's the use in that? Perhaps I can appeal and take him back to court, but that's about it." Sally shook her head emphatically. "The courts are a legal system, darling. They don't do justice. You saw that for yourself this morning. If you want justice, there's just us." So what do I do? Asked Emma. Sally looked at her thoughtfully. Imagine the courts had handed Bob Harland over to you, trussed like a turkey, and said you could do anything you wanted to him. What would you do? Emma's face creased up in fury. I'd ram my carving knife through his chest. Sally laughed. That's a bit quick, isn't it? What do you mean? Emma shot back. You're hurting. I mean, really hurting. I heard the noises you were making when I arrived. Don't you want him to feel something too? Emma leapt to her feet and started to walk around, aggression pouring out of her. Her right hand shot out, fingers spread, but curved and strong like a claw. Yes, I want to scratch his eyes out. And? Sally said softly. I want to shred him, cripple him, throw him down a hole and watch the bastard rot. Emma snarled out the words, dispelling her excess energy through twists and turns on the patio, her fists clenched tight. I want to be there at the end, to watch the life and hope drain from his ugly, useless face and savour the last final flicker in his eyes. There you go, said Sally slowly. Much more creative. She sat up and pulled a bottle of soda water from the basket. But, she said, the court didn't give him to you, so what can you really do? Emma slumped back into her chair. There's nothing I can do, she said sadly. Really? Asked Sally, handing her a soda and lemon. Emma glared at her. Not if I want to stay out of jail. Sally nodded. Ah, and there it is, the real reason. If you really thought we could get away with it, would you at least consider taking your revenge? Emma thought for a moment. Yes, she nodded. Yes, I would. A second thought struck her. What do you mean, we? Sally smiled. Well, we have a lot in common. Husbands killed by father and son drunks, evidence falsified by the same cop, the same smart-arse lying lawyer. Whoa, cried Emma. What are you talking about? What about the cop and the lawyer? Well, Tomlinson, the cop who attended both crashes, is under investigation. My friend in the police thinks he deliberately lost the blood test taken at Graham's crash to force a later one to replace it, which of course showed a lower reading. He reckons the same stunt might have been pulled this time too. Well, Peregrine couldn't actually say that out loud, but it's why he was there today, observing, as he put it. Sally took another sip. Oh, that's refreshing. Almost as nice as the gin. Who's Peregrine? Detective Inspector Peregrine McEwen, one of my very best friends. Your best friend's a cop? Sally laughed. What's so strange about that? He's a really great guy. Now Holmes, the lawyer, he told the judge that George's accident was simply a matter of oil on the road, hidden by the rain. He didn't provide any evidence to support it, and conveniently, Tomlinson hadn't checked, but it convinced the judge enough to let Bob go, right? Emma nodded. Sally took another sip. What the judge seems to have forgotten is that Holmes and Tomlinson played the exact same trick 3 years ago to get Dick Harland acquitted of killing Graham. Emma gasped. You think they rigged it between them? Sally nodded. Absolutely. Throw in the swapped blood samples and it's way beyond coincidence. That's unforgivable, cried Emma. Sally took another sip of her gin. Yep, but it worked. Now, the question is, what do you want to do about it? Do you want to hit back, or do you want to let it slide? Hit back, of course, but I don't want to go to jail, said Emma firmly. Sally nodded. Me neither. So unless we're positive we're going to get away with it, we do nothing. Agreed? Emma nodded again. Our second problem, Sally continued, is how to catch them. She took another sip and smiled at Emma. That's going to be a whole lot harder than actually killing them. Emma screwed up her face. Do we have to kill them? It sounds awfully extreme. And throwing Bob's mangled body down a hole so you can watch it rot isn't? Laughed Sally. But that was just fantasy, Sally. You're talking about actually doing it, cried Emma. Sally pursed her lips as if in thought. Well, I guess we could leave them alive, but it'll massively increase the chances of getting caught if they can talk about it afterwards. Emma held both her hands up in front of her. You're moving too fast for me, Sally. I can't commit to this. I need more time to think. Sally nodded. That's no trouble. It's going to take a while to plan things out anyway, and we need to let a bit of time go by to let everyone else believe that we've moved on. We can have loads of fun figuring out how to pull it off, and you can call a halt whenever you want to. Perhaps knowing you could kill them whenever you felt like it might be enough for you, to hold that power but not use it. How does that sound? Emma nodded in relief. That sounds much better. So it'll be like playing a game then? Sally laughed. Exactly. Emma raised her glass. Sounds great to me. When do we start? Sally clinked her own glass against Emma's. We already have. "Hello, Perry. You're home early," said Hilary. "Quiet day?" Peregrine McEwen slid open the kitchen round slider and stepped out onto the deck. "Greetings, beloved wife. Sort of quiet, I guess. Hello, Alison. Did you two enjoy your golf this afternoon?" Alison Falconer, friend, neighbour and landlord, raised her martini. "Well, I certainly did. I won for a change." "You deserved it," admitted Hilary. "You've never been so good off the tee before." "Do anything interesting today, Perry?" she asked, pouring him a brandy and ginger ale. Peregrine eased himself down into his deck chair recliner and gratefully accepted his drink. "Ta, muchly. I spent the morning in court, observing a drunk driver case." "Observing?" asked Hilary. "I thought you lot were short-handed, as usual. How'd you get the time off to observe a trivial thing like that?" Peregrine took a long, slow sip. "It wasn't so trivial. It was Bob Harland's trial." "Was Sally there?" asked Alison instantly. "My, you're quick. You should be a police officer with a mind like that." "Yes, Sally was there." He took another thoughtful sip. "That's a pity. I thought she'd managed to let Graham's death go," said Alison sadly. "Be fair, Alison. Dick Harland is Bob's father. It's not surprising she'd be interested," said Peregrine. "It was a bit surreal, to be honest, because Holmes and Tomlinson were both involved as well." "Ah, so that's who you were observing," said Hilary, nodding gently. "And?" "I think we might have him this time. He's been a bit careless," replied Peregrine. "What are you talking about?" asked Alison. Peregrine looked at her over the top of his glass. "I can't really say much more than that, I'm afraid." Alison rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. Holmes is my solicitor. I need to know if he's been up to no good." "It isn't Holmes I'm talking about," said Peregrine quickly, before trying to divert Alison's focus. "After the not guilty verdict, Bob Harland made a couple of smart-arse comments to the victim's widow, and her two sons just went for him, inside the court." Hilary laughed. "What, did they get him?" "Nah, security got between them and calmed it all down. Tell you what, though, it shook the Harlands to the core. I reckon they'll both be checking their doors and windows for a while." "Room for a small one?" came a woman's voice from inside the house. "We're out on the deck, Fliss. Bring a glass," Hilary called back. "I'm way ahead of you," laughed a pretty redhead as she walked onto the deck with a large glass of Chablis. Hilary's eyes widened. "I was going to use that in tonight's dinner." Felicity shook her head. "No, you weren't. I saw the recipe on the bench, so I opened a new bottle." Peregrine laughed. "Dr. Coots, how nice to see that your pathologist's knack for detail remains intact." Felicity put her glass down on the table and beckoned him back to the kitchen. "Speaking of which, I have news. Sorry, ladies, police business, but will only be a second." Peregrine slid the door closed behind them. "The blood test?" Felicity nodded. "It could be from Bob Harland. It's his type. Where did you say you found it again?" "Jeff Bloom picked it up as part of the Rotary Club's litter drive along the road to the rubbish dump. He recognised it as a medical sample and asked me if there was anything special he needed to do with it, or if he could just chuck it. The label had been removed, so I asked him if he'd seen anything where he picked it up that might identify the owner. He said he thought there were some envelopes nearby with Edgar Tomlinson written on them, but they'd already been fed into the recycler by the time he approached me. Well, the blood does have a relatively high alcohol level, so it could have been a police sample, but we can't be sure." "Fingerprints?" asked Peregrine. Felicity shook her head. "None. I take it Jeff was wearing gloves when he found it?" "Yep. Standard procedure on litter pickup. He gave it to me in a plastic bag too, so mine wouldn't be there either." "Well, I don't trust those new DNA tests yet, and because you've only got Jeff's word about the envelopes, while you might be able to frighten him, I don't think you'll be able to make it stick." Peregrine twisted his mouth in frustration. "You're probably right, damn it. This is going to require a bit more thought than I'd hoped. Oh well, if you fill that glass bowl with crisps, I'll get the cheese and crackers. Dinner's over an hour away yet." "We'd like to see Mr. Andrew Holmes," said Freddie simply when the lawyer's front door opened. The man looked past them to the Ford Transit. "Mr. Holmes doesn't usually do business with tradesmen at this time of night, but I'll ask if he'll see you." James gave his most crocodilian of smiles. "Just tell him that James Alpers would appreciate a word about the Walker case. I'm sure he'll be happy to see us." The man nodded. "Certainly, sir. There's a seat to the left if you'd like to use it in the meantime." And without betraying any emotion at all, he closed the door and went in search of his master. "Pompous twit," growled James under his breath. "Someone should tell him the Edwardian age is well and truly over." Freddie laughed. "Oh, I don't know. It's kind of nice seeing a period drama brought to life. My, that was quick." There was a rapid tap-tap-tap of leather on wood as the servant hurried back to open the door. "Mr. Holmes would be delighted to see you, Mr. Alpers, and your friend. He's in the lounge, second door on the left. If you'd like to see yourselves in, I'll go and get the drinks." "Mr. Alpers, how nice to see you again," said Holmes, rising from his chair to greet them. "And you, Mr. Holmes. This is my colleague, Freddie Somers." "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Somers." "Please, both of you, take a seat," bowed Holmes. "Now, what can I do for you?" James plopped himself down into a plush leather chair. "It's about the Walker case." "Ah, yes," said Holmes, clasping his hands. "Do you mean his disappearance, the unfortunate business with his wife, or both?" "Both," said Freddie, earning himself a look from his colleague. "It's recently come to light," began James, "that Terry Walker wrote certain things down that ought not to have been written down." He paused to let it sink in. "Things that could affect all of us in this room." Holmes's face betrayed nothing. "Indeed. Do you know the specifics of this document?" "Some of it. Enough to know how dangerous it could be were it to be found," continued James. "And its whereabouts are unknown at this juncture?" "Precisely, and we'd like to find them." "You had a rather special relationship with him, so we thought we'd start by asking if he gave you something to look after." Holmes noted that while James's voice was polite and matter-of-fact, there was something in the eyes that brooked no nonsense. He shook his head solemnly. "No, I'm afraid not. I represented him at the time of his trial, but my firm did not look after his will nor his affairs. You're welcome to look over the trial materials. I can have them here tomorrow if you wish." James shook his head. "Not unless they contain anything written by Terry himself. Perhaps you could tell Freddie here exactly what arrangements you and Terry made for his trial?" Holmes raised his eyebrows. "Are you seeking just the salient facts, or all the special details?" He fixed James with a meaningful eye. "Particularly the special details," said James. "Very well." Holmes cupped his hands to his ear and listened. "Algy's still making the tea and coffee, so we have a few moments, I think. Well, Mr. Walker came to me now, when was it? Oh, yes, the 9th of February, 1984, the day after his wife so sadly fell down that cliff." He looked serious. "Mr. Walker explained to me the situation and intimated that there was a witness who might have got the wrong end of the stick and that it would be unfortunate should the man come forward during the trial. Mr. Walker asked me if it were possible to take steps that would ensure this other person's non-appearance in court. I replied that most things were possible should the appropriate rewards be offered in exchange, and we came to terms." "What specifically did you do?" asked Freddie. James spotted the expression on Holmes's face. "It's okay, Mr. Holmes. Freddie really is one of my colleagues, someone who worked with Terry occasionally." Holmes nodded gravely. "Very well. I discussed matters with a police fixer friend of mine, Sergeant Edgar Tomlinson, a man who can usually be relied upon to see things the way they should be seen." "For an appropriate reward?" asked James. "Quite. Beautifully put, if I may say." "In this case, he undertook to take whatever steps became necessary to smooth the investigative waters after the deed had been done. I then talked to an old customer of mine, Dick Harland. He's neither particularly bright nor particularly stupid, but he does get things done, and he keeps his mouth shut. Two admirable qualities, I always find. He thought a car accident might be the best way of fixing matters, and I was able to inform him that the gentleman concerned had a regular Sunday evening Dungeons and Dragons session, whatever that is, in Little Dimpton. That enabled Dick to work out exactly where and when he could arrange the crash." "But it didn't go quite right, did it?" asked Freddie. Holmes frowned. "No, it didn't. Dick hadn't ever done anything like that before, and he got a bit flustered and took a few swigs of brandy while he was waiting for the witness's car to appear. His breath reeked of the stuff when the police arrived. Fortunately for him, Tomlinson used it to his advantage. He supervised Dick's blood test and put the sample with the rest of the evidence. He then conveniently mislaid it overnight, which required Dick to have another test the following morning after the loss was discovered. By then, of course, he was back under the legal limit, so there was no actual evidence to convict him. In fact, the drink thing actually distracted everyone else away from the possibility that it might have been a deliberate crash. I encouraged the judge to think it was oil on the wet road, and he accepted that. Job done, happy clients all round. Ah, welcome, Algy. That's first-class timing. Just pop the tray down there, will you? Excellent. Why don't you have the rest of the night off? I don't think I'll need you any more tonight." "Very good, Mr. Holmes. I'll see you in the morning," bowed Algy. Holmes leant over the table. "If you gentlemen would like to pour your own tea or coffee, I'll see to the stronger stuff. A single malt, perhaps? I have an excellent Highland Park if you'd care to try it." While Holmes busied himself pouring the glasses, James asked a further question. "So how did you get Terry off his own charge?" There was a loud squeak as Holmes punched the cork back into the bottle. "Young Tomlinson was very useful there, too. He managed to lose all the photographs of the footprints at the top of the cliff, and then went one better by losing 2 key affidavits from an expert who died before the trial." "Another one of your arrangements?" asked Freddie. "No," laughed Holmes, handing over the glass. "Terry could thank the good Lord for that one. The man died in his sleep." Didn't the police get a bit upset with your careless cop? Asked James. Oh yes indeed. It put quite a dent in Tomlinson's promotion prospects, but then he was amply compensated for it. I think he was happy with his end of the deal. He can't be too worried about it because you two have just pulled exactly the same stunt with Bob Harland today. Surely that's going to raise even more suspicions? Asked James. Holmes twisted his face in annoyance. It very well might. I'm most displeased about that. When Bob Harland crashed, killing the other driver, Tomlinson saw an opportunity to make some money. He oversaw the blood sample being taken and then went that night to have a chat with Daddy Dick. He suggested that if Dick paid him a certain sum, then that sample could be lost as well. Given the seriousness of the charges Bob was likely to face, Dick paid up and Tomlinson mislaid the file as promised. Only then did he come and see me. It was a stupid idea that put both of us in danger, but I didn't have a choice by that stage. How high's the risk, do you think? Asked James. To Tomlinson? Pretty high, I suspect, which is why he asked Dick for almost the same amount I paid Dick to kill Mellors in the first place. There was a detective inspector in court today who had no reason to be there. I assume he was watching Tomlinson to see how things played out. It could make things a little warm for me too, of course, but there's absolutely no paper trail to link me to anything. It would all be circumstantial, their word against mine. So if Tomlinson's a bit too impulsive, do you think he had anything to do with Terry's disappearance? Asked Freddie. What? Oh dear me, no. He had no motivation along those lines at all, and in any case he was in the police station the whole day when Terry vanished. How about Dick Harland? Freddie continued. Holmes shook his head. No, he never knew why he was killing Mellors. He doesn't know to this day that it had anything to do with the Walker case. As far as I know, Mellors never mentioned Carol's accident to anyone except to say he was at the beach when it happened. If he'd tried blackmail, I'm sure that Terry would have mentioned it. So what actually happened to Terry? James asked. Holmes sipped his drink. Nobody knows. Not me, not the police, nobody. All we know is that he was last seen going for a ride on his bicycle and he simply vanished. The police did an extensive check and nothing was ever found of either him or the bike. He looked up. I don't know exactly what your line of work is, gentlemen, but it strikes me as one that's likely to make you a few enemies from time to time. Perhaps one of them made an appearance. James maintained a neutral expression. It's possible, but if so, where's the document? We'd expect to be seeing some consequences by now if it's fallen into someone's hands. At that very moment, Ted Malcolm and Mark Evans were slipping in through a lounge window in Beatty Close. Man, giggled Ted, it feels so cool to burgle a place just 3 blocks from the Throcking police station. Keep your voice down, you muppet, hissed Mark. Boy, look at all the dust in here. Anyone would think there hadn't been anybody living there for years. That's because they haven't, grinned Ted. This is Old Man Walker's place. You know, the guy who did a bunk a few years back. This is one time we're not going to be worried about the owners coming home early. The teenagers went through each room thoroughly, bagging the jewellery, the CDs and the television. Leave the videos in the player, said Mark. Nobody'll want that old rubbish. How about the painting? Asked Ted, pointing to a large oil painting of a woman in a bikini sitting on the beach. Nice, said Mark. Not to keep, you idiot. To sell, snapped Ted. It's an original, of the wife. I remember her photo in the papers. Nah, on second thoughts, let's leave it. It's too easily traced. Seems a pity, murmured Mark. I wonder how heavy it is. He took hold of the bottom corners of the frame and lifted. The painting came away easily from the wall and rested lightly in his hands. Ted shook his head in dismay at his friend's stupidity, but in doing so spotted a flaw on the wall where the fixture had been. The streetlight coming in the window highlighted a number of very shallow shadows in the plaster. Here, put that down for a minute. I reckon there's something hidden here, he said. Mark followed the pointing finger and looked at the wall. I can't see anything, he said. Come over here then. Maybe you need to have the light just right. Mark joined Ted and looked along the wall. Okay, I see it. Maybe it's just a bad repair. Ted shrugged. Then we should give someone the opportunity to fix it, eh? And so saying, he whacked his jimmy bar into the wall. There was a loud metallic clang as the end of the tool smashed through the plaster. Ted changed tack and began to use the jimmy as an adze to strip away the wall. Stone me, it's a safe, gasped Mark. Ted worked the jimmy down the sides of the steel box. It's bolted into place, and it's a good one. We'll never get it opened in here. We'll have to get it out. How? Complained his friend. Like this. It took them a good 3 hours and Terry Walker's own saw to pry the safe free, and even then it came with great lumps of wood attached.